Now we'll take a look at some causal fallacies. As you might recall from earlier in the course, a fallacy is broadly defined as a error or mistake in reasoning. More formally, you could say that it's a bad argument, one in which the premises given do not adequately support the conclusion. Now, two of the classic causal fallacies are, of course, in Latin. There's the post hoc ergo propter hoc, and the cum hoc ergo propter hoc. So the post hoc ergo propter hoc defined is this. It involves thinking the fact that one thing immediately precedes another proves that the first thing caused the second thing. The translation of post hoc ergo propter hoc is after this, therefore because of this. And of course, although causation, at least outside of science fiction, the cause does precede the effect, just because one thing precedes another obviously does not entail that the first thing must be the cause of the second. Now, in terms of the form, the structure of the reasoning, it's an argument with one premise and, of course, as always, one conclusion. So it would be that in the case of causation, like in general, it would be A's immediately precede B's, therefore A's cause B's. Or if you're looking at individual causation, it would be premise one, this A precedes this B, conclusion, this A causes this B. And it's a common mistake in reasoning, sometimes used unintentionally. People do engage in this when they're trying to reason well causally, but they end up making a mistake. It's also something that can be potentially misused to try to persuade others. And of course, the only way you can kind of be sure is if you know a person's intent. Are they trying to get to the truth and making a mistake, or are they well aware of what they're doing? So it would be some examples of post hoc ergo propter hoc. Well, the mistake being made is the person is making a rapid leap from this occurs before that, therefore this causes that. For example, imagine that Bill gets very sick, and then Sally prays for Bill's recovery. Then Bill recovers, and Sally concludes that simply because of this, that her prayers helped Bill recover, that her prayers were causally effective. Now, this is not to say that prayers must therefore be ineffective, but this would be post hoc. The mere fact that she prayed and he recovered does not prove that this was a causal factor. More would be needed. You need going back to our experiments and studies, you need something like that. Another example, which this is one happens with computers. Suppose someone buys a new video card from their computer, they install it, then their computer starts crashing, and immediately conclude, aha, the card must be causing this problem. Now, on the face of it, this doesn't seem like really terrible reasoning. It's seems kind of sensible. The method of difference. Here's the change. Got a new video card. Computer's now crashing, so that must be the problem. And the problem, of course, is the inference that it must be the problem. It's too quick, because although that would be something definitely you'd want to check, it may simply be a coincidence that the card was added, then it started crashing. It may be the cause. In fact, the person may be right about the cause, but they're not right for good reasons, which is a critical thing to keep in mind again about fallacies. Just because a fallacy is committed doesn't mean the person's conclusion is false. That would be, the book doesn't mention this, but that's the fallacy, to infer that a fallacy must have a false conclusion. Now, in some cases, as I mentioned, the fallacy is used kind of intentionally, often for like political or ideological purposes, but it can also be done accidentally. A person who's reasoning like this, not with intent to deceive, they just happen to deceive themselves. For example, take the debate over gun control. So a person might say, well, if you want to stop violent crime, don't try gun control. Look at for example, Chicago. They passed very strict gun control, laws, and what was the result? Crime increased. And so the person would be inferring that passing the gun control law resulted in an increase in crime. Now, that could be true, but simply saying, look, they passed these laws, there's more crime, therefore that's the cause, would be a mistake. You need more than just one thing happened, then a second thing happened. Final example, imagine a person has a heart attack while running, and then they're recovering, they get a second one. And then they decide, they read about some new, special diet plan that purports to be able to, help them recover. And they just, they don't really research it. They just hear someone mention it, and they try that diet. They recover, they run, get back to running, and they conclude it must have definitely been the diet. Now, if they're just saying, well, I went on this diet, I recovered and got back to running, the diet must be the cause, that would be a mistake. I mean, they could be right. Maybe this diet really does work very well, but this would be post hoc, merely because one thing happens, another thing happens, doesn't mean there's a causal connection. Now, again, it doesn't mean there's not a causal connection, but it doesn't mean there is. So the way to recognize a post hoc ergo propter hoc is pretty straightforward. All a person has is just this happened before that, therefore this caused that. And that's the mistake. What a person needs is when we looked at the various methods of causal reasoning, you need more than one thing happens than another. You've got to do, in the case of causation in population, actual experiments or studies. Our second fallacy is cum hoc ergo propter hoc, which is a correlation fallacy. The translation is basically roughly, with this, therefore because of this. So this occurs when a person thinks, aha, there's correlation between two things, so there must be a causal connection. And everyone, of course, has heard the phrase, correlation is not causation, which is good advice. The mere fact that things correlate doesn't mean that there is a causal connection. And so what a person might, say, oh, whenever Joe Biden speaks about the economy, then gas prices go up. Therefore, he must be causing that. That, of course, would be, mistaken. You need, even if it were somehow true, you would need more than just one thing correlates with another. You would need to actually show that there is a causal connection, or at least make it plausible. So how do you sort these things out? Well, again, in the case of recognizing this fallacy, again, pretty straightforward. It's got one premise, it's got a conclusion, and the reasoning is A's are correlated with B's, therefore A's cause B's. Now, it could end up being true that A's do cause B's. The person could be correct in their conclusion, but of course the logic is bad because of a lack of support. And again, bad logic is not about whether the conclusion is true or not. It's about whether the reasoning is good. So why are these two things fallacies? Well, essentially, there are the following things to consider. That essentially what occurs when someone commits one of these fallacies is that they're not considering, that these three possibilities you look at, 1, 2, and 3, they're not considering that these might hold. And in fact, these possibilities do lead to or reference other fallacies. So here's what to consider. The first thing is that the connection between the two things, A and B, might be what we call, coincidence. That A occurs, B occurs, and it's just pure coincidence. And we should always ask, is this just coincidence? For example, I'll use an example from my own experience. A couple of years ago, I got a new video card as a Christmas present. Put it in my computer, and the computer booted up, and it was going fine. And then it, froze, and then I rebooted it froze, or rebooted it, and it froze. And of course, a reasonable inference would seem to be, well, by method of difference, I got a new video card, now suddenly my computer is crashing. But if I didn't consider the possibility of coincidence, and I just, sent the card back, I obviously could be mistaken. In this case, it did turn out that I was mistaken. It was just pure coincidence that I got my video card at the same time my hard drive controllers were failing on my motherboard. So that was the problem, which I found out using the method of, there were a lot of effort, eventually found out that was the problem. But if I merely rushed to say, well, new video card, crash, video card cause, and send it back, I would have wasted time sending back a perfectly good card. Another example, one kind of, I guess, myth is that cats and dogs can predict earthquakes or natural disasters. Now, always check on this, because it may turn out that, new science shows that, dogs or cats are reliable earthquake indicators. Now, what people often do is someone will notice like their pets, like their cat, acting odd, and a few days later there'll be like an earthquake, or there'll be some sort of a tornado or something. And then someone might say, aha, my cat acted oddly. A few days later, there's an earthquake. My cat was, knew there was an earthquake. The earthquake, what was leading to the earthquake caused that. Now, of course, that could be pure coincidence. If you're familiar with cats and dogs, they act odd lots of times. Like this morning, I was running my dog, and he acted odd on the run. Yeah, you just kind of like stop, and there's like no noise that I can hear, etc. He just stops, and he's just like staring, and just nowhere apparently, and nothing happened yet. I mean, I'm sure something somewhere in the world obviously has happened, but animals act odd all the time. And so what a person would tend to do is think of the case, aha, my cat acted odd, there was an earthquake, my cat, detected the earthquake. The earthquake caused my cat to do this. So the first thing to consider is maybe it's just coincidence. Second thing to consider is this, that there is what's called an underlying cause. That it's not that A is causing B, it's that A and B are both effects of a third thing. That's the actual cause. To use kind of a silly example, but also kind of a sad and tragic one, when there's a correlation between ice cream sales and drowning deaths. And this is, pretty horrible. But as ice cream sales increase, drowning deaths also increase. Now, you've probably heard people say you shouldn't swim, sooner than 30 minutes after eating, which is totally not true. That's, totally unfounded, a swimming myth. But there is an actual correlation between ice cream sales and deaths by drowning. However, it's not the ice cream that is causing the drowning. Rather, there's a third factor that's causing both. Namely, that there's an increase, it's when it gets warmer, then people buy more ice cream, but also swim more, and hence, unfortunately, when more people swim, more people drown. And so that correlation is just a correlation caused by warmer weather. And to avoid this, what you want to do is avoid what's known as ignoring a common cause. And you should consider that possibility. Maybe there's a third factor causing both. The final possibility is what's called reversing causation, or confusing, effect with cause. This occurs when a person infers that, A and B are correlated or, occur together, that one must have caused the other. In this case, the mistake is not considering the causal order is reversed. So how can this come about? Well, take a person's bad back and a person having poor posture. Is it, there's a correlation often, but is it that the bad back is causing the poor posture, or is the poor posture, due to the bad back? A more substantial example would be something like this. Suppose someone learns that there's seemingly a correlation between homeowners being more, responsible than non-homeowners, broadly construed. They look at it and say, well, they tend to save more. They tend to, miss fewer days of work, tend to be employed, however you want to sort of like bourgeois middle class define responsibility. And so a person might infer, why, if homeowners are more responsible than non-homeowners, the way to make people say more responsible is for people to, buy houses. That'll make a person more responsible. Now, obviously, that's reversing causation, because laying aside, obviously, like people just being given money or being lucky enough to choose wealthy parents, in general, the only way you can afford a house, especially these days, is if you're, one, lucky, and also you might say a person might be like, say, more responsible. If someone's really bad with their money and they're not wealthy, they're not going to be able to afford a house. So the correlation is not that being a homeowner makes someone, say, more responsible or more successful. It's that being more responsible, more successful, again, in a bourgeois definition of the term, makes it more likely that someone will own a house. A final example of violence in media and real-world violence. Now, there is obviously a correlation between the existence of violent video games, violent movies, and violence in real life. There's a correlation. Now, many arguments for censorship take the inference that, video games and movies, etc., contain violence, so they're causing violence in real life. But one should consider maybe the effect is being reversed. Maybe there's violence in media because there's violence in real life. As a concrete example, particular example, the rap music and its variations are often accused of inciting violence because they include violence in the lyrics. They talk about, people being, killed by the police. They talk about gun violence and death and so forth. And so critics will often say, oh, look, they're inspiring violence by singing about, this violence. But a reasonable response made by people who, defend this music is that they're not, it's not that they sing about violence and they cause violence. It's that the violence that occurs in real life, people being killed by the police, killed in crime, hurt, etc., that is why they sing about violence, because that's a thing that's occurring. We wouldn't think that because people sing about, relationships and love songs, that the songs are therefore causing relationships or causing love to exist. We would say rather that people sing about relationships and breakups and love songs, etc., and love, because those things occur. That's the causation. So we'd want to consider the possibility of reversed causation. And so those are two of the most common causal fallacies: post hoc ergo propter hoc, and cum hoc ergo propter hoc.